And welcome to my pilot semi-structured interview presentation on revisiting the front desk operations post-pandemic. The purpose of this pilot study is to figure out how the future of front desk in hotel will look like, explore what changes, if any, in operations of the front desk department during and post-COVID situation have been made, propose a guest-friendly guideline to follow, and also measure a staff level of concentration and focus during the pandemic. In order to conduct the research, I had to do some preparation first. In the following slide, you will see some of the articles that inspired me to some extent to pick up this topic. Since the nature of my research questions are qualitative and open-ended in nature, I realized the best way to elicit the required information would be through conducting interviews. With regards to case of my study, I decided to focus on a hotel where I used to work before, since it was more convenient and accessible for me to set up and conduct interviews. To ask for time for conducting interviews, I had to reach out to some of my previous colleagues, build and establish some lost rapport, and distribute consent forms before actually conducting the interviews. Introduction letter was offered but was deemed unnecessary, so was not distributed. As for sources of motivation, guidance, and finding the gap in the related literature, I looked at the following resources. According to Agrawal 2021, HRM is the department that directly lays the foundation and sets the policies for what strategies should be followed. I was curious to see if this is the case in my case of a study, so that was very inspiring to me. Also, Critica 2020 weighs the advantages of traditional front desk operations against the advantages of leaning toward a more modern technology-based model. As one of my research questions, this article helped me look for a more concrete answer. After reviewing the feedback that I received on my draft proposal, I made some changes to my research questions so that they are more open-ended and allow for open interpretation and discussion. Here you can see my research questions. As the interviews were going on, I was constantly checking to make sure the proposed questions won't be left unanswered. At some points during the interview, I had to paraphrase or simplify some of the questions. I tried to put them in the format as you can see here. A little bit about the case that I have observed. 4-star hotel with close to 300 rooms, high occupancy rate in almost all season. They of course shut down due to the COVID pandemic for 6 months, but now it's been a couple months that they have reopened and are functioning at full capacity. The first and longest interview I conducted was with one of my previous colleagues. He is the human resources manager and also the front desk manager of the hotel. It was a very informative session and he let me know that they are trying to prepare the infrastructure necessary for developing online and technology-based services such as contactless check-ins and check-outs. And when I asked him about timing, he wasn't sure and said maybe a couple of years or even more. Next interview was with the hotel's front desk supervisor. He's the oldest among all the participants, and honestly his insights on the matter in discussion were very genuine, realistic, and well thought out. Next two participants were front desk clerks. They offered more personal responses. At one point, due to language barriers, I had to switch to Farsi to make sure the message is being conveyed thoroughly and correctly. The last interview he had a very upset tone and was very unsatisfied with his working environment. As for the data collection and data use, all video and voice calls were recorded. Since I wanted to solely focus on the discussion, I did not take notes during the interviews. However, I was constantly checking to see if my questions are being answered, and in some cases I had to repeat my questions or paraphrase them. After the interviews were done, I went through the recordings, took notes, transcribed the parts that are the answers to the questions that I'm looking for, and in some instances I had to also do a translation from Farsi to English. Report on the findings after having conducted the interviews. For the first question, What does the future of front desk operations look like? Except for one subject, all other three subjects believe that hotel operations will continue to be in the traditional way for the foreseeable future. However, one of the subjects believe that it is just a matter of time and it might take some time, but maybe after a couple of years or so, the hotel will be switching to more uh, online processes for at least check-ins and check-outs. The second question was that would online system and advanced technology affect the operations at front desk? All participants believe that technology can help facilitate providing services to guests. Also, two of the participants stated that they are not sure if new changes are welcomed at all by either the decision makers in the hotel or even the majority of the guests. Their justification is that the majority of the guests coming to the hotel are usually the elderly and they are not very technology friendly and they are much more comfortable to deal with their check-in and check-out process as they always have. Also, one of the participants showed much concern over excessive use of technology. He believed that excessive use of technology may lead to the human staff losing their job, and that may cause serious unemployment problems. With regards to the third question, which is what are guest preferences with regards to check-in and check-out processes when it comes to either contactless versus traditional method? 3 out of 4 interviewees believe age is a strong and defining factor with regards to which method they prefer. Younger generation, they just prefer online and faster method, while the older generation, they prefer the traditional way of check-in and check-out, simply maybe just because they don't know how to proceed with the online way of check-in and check-out, and it might be too complicated for them. Also, one of the participants believes that it depends on people's personality and characteristics, character type, and even the reason that they travel. His justification was that since people are traveling for different reasons, they might prefer to have different kind of interactions with people. For example, if someone is traveling for uh, leisure only, he or she might need to have more exposure to being in society and having some social chit chat. While when someone is here for business, they might just want to get rid of their check-in and check-out process very fast so that they can catch their next meeting, for example. With regards to question number 4, that is, how has the pandemic affected the performance of front desk staff, if at all? 2 out of 4 participants stated that they have serious concerns for the health and well-being of themselves and also their families. And stressful working environment has made it hard for them to stay focused on the task at hand. One of the examples that one of the subject actually used was that once a guest comes in and asks for their room to be changed for whatever the problem is, he cannot stay focused on the tasks because maybe the guest is not wearing a mask or he is just not staying as distant as he should be. So that causes a lot of distress and lack of concentration on the side of the front desk staff. Also, one of the subjects believes good preventive measures are already in place and therefore he doesn't feel any kind of nervousness or pressure. And one of the subjects was very frustrated with some of the guests who refused to wear masks while inside the hotel. What he actually mentioned is that some of the guests come in and tell me the COVID-19 doesn't exist, these are all politics, and I'm not going to wear a mask. So these are some of the complications that the front desk staff are facing there at the moment. And the last question, what method do the front desk staff prefer to follow? Three out of the four participants believe that the ideal situation is to be able to use a combination of both traditional and online check-in and check-outs, depending on the situation and also depending on the preferences of the guests as well, since it will yield best results. However, one of the participants suggested that switching to online method for now would be the safer option. However, he believes that it is absolutely essential to return to normal, and the traditional way of check-in and check-out is the best way to follow. His reason for this was that people who come to the hotel, they are looking for interaction, they are looking for information, so it is absolutely necessary to have someone to go to and do their check-in and check-out, so that if there are any questions, they can also pose their questions. During the stage that I was conducting my interviews, there were some points that were raised by the interviewees that were actually shocking to me. One of them was that the hotel right now is operating at about 80% occupancy rate. And this is very shocking since right now in Iran, there are a lot of COVID cases and there are absolutely no vaccination plans in place. So this is very shocking and at the same time disturbing finding for me. Also, one other thing is that absolutely no changes have been made to allow for a safer check-in and check-out process. What I expected was that at least some measures would be put into place. Some of the things that are not absolutely necessary, they could have been dropped or omitted at least temporarily, but nothing has been done. They used to do this traditional way of filling in registration forms, and they are still even doing that. And even that part of the process that is not very necessary, at least during the COVID, it has not been omitted and it's still there. And another point, maybe not much related, but I just figured it out during my research, is that the fear of being infected has diminished while the virus remains highly dangerous, and now even it might be even more powerful and more deadly. To reflect on the process of my research and what I have learned, I have to say, before conducting my research, I did not account for some variables that play a crucial part. For example, Iran as a developing country is still very limited when it comes to technology use and is moving forward very slowly. Also, I was looking for one way that is best fit to lead a hotel in having successful operations. However, after having conducted this research, I have come to the understanding that different variables, situations, and preferences require hotels to be as flexible as possible to be successful, and therefore there is no single prescription to apply to all contexts. Also, in my case study, I found out that human resources manager, at least in the case that I've been studying, is not a decision maker with regards to setting policies and strategies, and they simply follow what they have been instructed by the managers and owners. To reflect on the method that I have adopted, I have to say my initial plan was to conduct a mixed method case study. I was going to have some interviews as I have done, and I was also going to distribute some surveys among guests to also learn more about them and their preferences. Now, however, I did not have enough time, and I also was not allowed to have access to the emails or phone numbers of the guests by the hotel. So that did not go to plan for me as I had planned. But what I have reflected on and what I will be doing next time is that I will be asking the hotel to give the guests some consent forms when they are registering and checking in. So I might be able to have their contact address and provide them with some surveys so that I can complete my research on that aspect. Another thing I found out is that interview skills are valuable assets. At some points in my interview, I was finding it very difficult to steer the conversation back to what I was trying to achieve. I would ask a question, and the subject would just go to a totally different direction, and it was very time consuming and hard for me to bring the conversation back to where I wanted. As for the limitations of my study, my initial plan was to have three focus groups: the front desk clerks, the supervisors and managers, and then the hotel guests and customers. But due to the limitations, mostly lack of time and also lack of information on the side of the guests and customers, I had to leave out my third focus group, and I only had two focus group in my study. Also, what I believe and what I experienced during my interviews is that creating rapport while you're doing full card interviews is very difficult. I was lucky because out of four participants, I already knew three of the participants as they were my colleagues before, like a couple of years ago. But one of the participants was new and I didn't know him before, so it was a bit difficult to establish rapport and try to get the conversation going in a comfortable and friendly manner. In the end, I would like to thank everyone for your attention, and if there are any questions regarding my research, I would be happy to answer them.